No.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a rainy, cold Friday afternoon at the end of your campaign period. I think we'll get started. We'll go right into our conversation. We've got a great conversation and lots of questions planned for the next 90 minutes. I'm Liz Blakeway. I am the network director for Land to Table, and I'm joining you today in the so-called Shuswap portion of our riding. And my feet touch the ground on the traditional and unceded territories of the Secwepemc people. This work that we're doing as a food system network in this place, in this riding, which is the basis of our conversation today, it takes place on the traditional, unceded, and stolen lands of both the Syilx and Secwepemc people, to whom we're really grateful for as the longtime stewards of our waterways and food lands here. I think the land is a good starting place for our conversation today. Vital to our work and our food systems and everything really is our connection to the land. And as a settler here, I'm in an ongoing learning journey about the impacts of colonialism and residential school and how destructive and disruptive that's been to Indigenous people and food systems. And I think given the summer that we've had in this area, with the heat and drought and wildfires, now more than ever, we need to honor the land and build connections in a way that is inclusive and adaptive, and that embraces the long history and role that Indigenous communities have played and continue to play in sustaining ecosystems and food systems. So to begin, I just want to offer my gratitude to the original stewards of this place. And with that, again, I want to extend a warm welcome to our panelists and to our candidates, as well as the audience, if you can call them an audience. It's weird when it's Zoom land. But thank you so much for taking the time on a Friday afternoon, just days away from the election, to have this conversation with us. I'll be your moderator, so I'll take us through the next 90 minutes with support from my Land to Table colleague, Mary Stockdale. I'm gonna wave. Yeah, I think you probably know most people. And Mary will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for us, which is great. And then we also have support from these fantastic Food Secure Canada folks. So we've got Gustav and Juliet from the Eat, Think, Vote campaign team, who are joining us from the other side of the country, and providing technical support. So we are recording this dialogue early next week, probably. So I'll share a little bit about why we felt like this conversation is important, and then I'll go through how we're going to flow through our time together. So this event came about pretty last minute, actually, but it felt important because we believe that we're voting in a time that is really testing the fragility of our food systems, whether that be an increase in food insecurity and disrupted global supply chains due to the global pandemic, or the difficulty in farming in a heat dome, in drought, and with the threat of wildfire. Right to the challenges faced by our Indigenous communities to access healthy and culturally appropriate food. Land to Table has been working in the North Okanagan for about 4 years now, to both grow our food system network, so that group of folks across the food system, through events like this, but then also to undertake projects that support our local small to medium scale farmers and strengthen our food system, our regional based food system as a whole. And we're also really happy to have you here today to participate in this Eat, Think, Vote event. Conversations like the one that we're about to have are bringing voices together across the country to make food a major election issue. And most importantly, I think it's showing our representatives that their constituents deeply care about the food that they eat, how it's produced, where it comes from, and how and who can access healthy local food. So that's a little bit about why we're here. So now I'll share a little bit how we're going to flow through our time together, which includes some ground rules for participating in the conversation. So we'll begin this afternoon by allowing our candidates 2 minutes each to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their party platform and their personal perspectives and experience around food policy and food issues. And from there, we'll move into our panel presentations. So we have a group of 4 panelists, one of which is a video contribution, and they'll share a little bit about some of their local stories and contexts and talk about the local issues that also connect to opportunities for federal attention and support. Each panelist will speak for about 5 minutes, and then they'll follow that with a related question to our candidates. And the candidates will each have 1 minute to respond to that question, with a total of 4 questions for that portion of our time. I should also note that those questions will be posted in the chat, so everyone can follow along in the chat after those, or probably around the same time that those questions are being read out. So once we've heard from each candidate, once we've heard from each panelist and the candidate responses to those questions, we'll move into a question and answer period. So that includes pre-prepared questions that we have sent to the candidates ahead of our session this afternoon, but then we'll also have time for questions from the audience. So audience, please make sure to submit your questions to us, and you can do that using the Q&A function, the Q&A button on the bottom right of your screen. And you can just keep adding to that as we move along. So that will take us to the end of our time together. We'll finish with a few closing remarks and hopefully have an opportunity for our participants to share in the chat what they're taking away from our conversation today. All right, so I've heard from others that this is a very polite group of candidates, and I am assuming that probably that also goes for our audience, but it is worth mentioning that this should be considered a respectful and inclusive space, and that means that we'll listen to and respect diverse opinions and avoid insulting, harsh, or rude language, both for those who are speaking and for those participating in the chat. The other ground rule that I'd like to ask everyone to honor is to keep the conversation on topic. In other words, just focused on the issues around food and agriculture. Anyone who is being disrespectful or taking discussion off topic will be given a warning and then asked to leave if it continues. So like I said, we have 2 functions to participate. You can use the chat box for comments, and that will be seen by everyone, or you can use the Q&A button, and those are questions that we will collect, that we will put forth to candidates during that second part of the Q&A period. And again, we'll ask candidates to do your best to respect the time limits that we've outlined. And there will be a timekeeper. So Juliet, if you can just wave your hands again. Yeah, that's Juliet's our timekeeper, and she'll have a sign. So she'll give you a 15-second warning before your time's up. She'll also let you know when your time is up if you're there. And then if you go about 15 seconds over your time, at that point, we'll mute your mic. Very strict rules around here. And the goal of our time together is really to ensure that we all get to listen and learn and step away feeling more connected and more informed about the food issues in our riding and nationally, and create an understanding of the opportunity that our candidates have to address some of these issues here. So we feel really fortunate to have had all of our candidates agree to participate today. Unfortunately, Ron Johnston with the NDP couldn't join us, so he's sent video responses to those pre-prepared questions that we shared with candidates. And And I don't believe Kyle Delphine has made it in, so he may not join us today. But we're really happy to have Mel Arnold from the Conservative Party, Andrea Gunner with the Green Party, and Shelley Desautels with the Liberal Party of Canada. So without further ado, I will pass it over to the candidates. As I mentioned, you each have 2 minutes to introduce yourself, your party platform, as well as any personal perspective or experience relating to food and agriculture. And thank you again for joining this conversation. I think we'll begin with Shelley, followed by Andrea, and then Mel, if that's all right. So Shelley, why don't you kick us off this afternoon?
Sure, thank you. So good evening, my name is Shelley Desautels, and I am running as the candidate for the Liberal Party here in the North Okanagan-Shuswap. I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you now from the traditional and unceded territory of the Sequester peoples and the chosen home for the Salmon-Arm Métis. I would like to say thank you to the Land to Table Network for hosting the Eat, Think, Vote event this evening. And thank you to my fellow candidates for once again joining me here in discussion. I was born and raised in Vernon, and I've lived here in Salmon Arm for the last 7 years. I have a degree in geography from UBCO with a focus on environmental sciences, as well as an advanced diploma in geographic information systems from BCIT. I am the spouse of a Canadian Forces veteran, the mother of 2 teenagers, an instructor at Okanagan College, and the owner of a mapping business, with my clients being First Nation Community Forest up near Williams Lake. I also serve on several boards, including the BC Community Forest Association board. So food security is a huge issue as we are faced with rising temperatures, lower rainfall, increased wildfires. We are seeing that our food systems are being threatened, and we must be aware as leaders in our community how everything from our towns, our rivers, our lakes, and farms are all interconnected. So tonight I am coming to this discussion. I am willing to talk about the Liberal Party platform and ideals in regards to food security. However, I am also coming to this discussion as a concerned community member and as an individual that's willing to listen to the panelists and take notes. And these are the experts in our fields. These are the people that shape our decisions. And these are the people that we need to partner with if we're going to develop strong policy. So these discussions are incredibly important to us in order to come up with how we are going to move forward as a country and as a community. Thank you very much.
How's that for timing? Wonderful. Thanks so much, Shelley. That's great. Andrea, how about you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to both Shelley and Mel for agreeing to do this, and to the panelists. It's always really wonderful to have that kind of support from the industry sector that we need to speak to. I'm an organic farmer and an agricultural economist. I've had over 30-year career working at all levels of government, including Indigenous. And mostly what I do is work with capacity building in the sector. And I was asked to run for the Green Party, which aligns well with my values. I am desperately concerned about food security and the viability of the agricultural industry. I'm also very concerned about social inequality. And so those fit well with the values of the Green Party. And the reason that I actually agreed to run is because I am freaked about climate change and the effects that it is having on our farm operation and those of the farm operations of my clients across BC. And mitigating those changes, mitigating the effects that are becoming more and more severe and more frequent, and yet also having some hope for the future because of what I see happening, not just in our area of the world, but across the world, with biological diversity and the strength that it can bring to not only reducing carbon emissions, but drawing down carbon. So I do have hope for the future and want to bring some of that forward onto the national stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea. That's great. Mel, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you to our hosts, Liz Blakeway and Mary Stockdale, for creating this opportunity for us to discuss the importance of strengthening our local food systems and creating a network to work on projects that benefit all sectors of our local food systems. Maclean's recently published an article about food insecurity in Nunavut, citing eye-popping grocery prices. We're also seeing large price increases here in the North Okanagan-Shuswap. Runaway inflation at 4.1% is creating hardships for every Canadian on fixed or lower incomes. Meat prices have risen nearly 7% and fuel up 30%, thereby making the transportation of our food supply 1/3 more expensive. If we don't immediately address the inflation issues, it's going to get worse. I firmly believe in supporting our agriculture sector. The majority of people in the region cannot produce all their own food products that they need to maintain good nutrition. It's imperative that our agribusiness at the beginning of the supply chain is supported to provide the benefit and surety to local producers and consumers, and to the quality assurance of products to Canadian families. The heat domes, wildfires, drought, and conversely floods have created huge challenges for orchardists, farmers, and other food producers, creating an urgency for all of us to address our changing climate. I look forward to discussing our plan for doing just that and to the questions that will be posed to each of us this afternoon. Thank you for your invitation to participate. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Mel. And now we'll hear from Ron via video.
Hello, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the village of Chase upon the unceded traditional territory of the Shewecum peoples. My name is Ron Johnston, NDP candidate for North Okanagan-Shuswap. I offer my sincere regrets that I was unable to attend this important event, and I am grateful for the opportunity to present this video to share the NDP vision around food and agriculture. Born and raised in Calgary, I have enjoyed a career in mechanical design, working for high-tech companies that brought me to BC in 2000. Volunteerism has also been important to me, from years spent with the Calgary Aerospace Museum after college to being a director of the Prince George Downtown Association, before shifting that energy into supporting the NDP. For several years, I've worked with both the provincial and the federal NDP EDAs, having most recently worked on the successful campaign of our MLA Harwinder Sandhu. The pandemic has hit very hard for so many families in the North Okanagan-Shuswap. Between job loss and rising costs, getting by day to day has become harder than ever. We will touch on these issues today, talking about food and housing insecurity. I understand these challenges firsthand because my family faces the same struggles. This was a big part of my decision to run. Working class people are vastly underrepresented in Canadian politics, but I'm running to give power and a voice back to everyday people in the North Okanagan-Shuswap. Here in this beautiful part of BC, we're very fortunate to be surrounded by an abundance of agriculture that gives us immense diversity and nutritious local choices to put on our plate. I'll get straight into answering the questions that were sent out. Those questions are very detailed and insightful, so I will summarize them rather than repeating them in full.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Gustav. Well, thank you. I think this is going to be a really great conversation, based on your background and experience and interest in this topic. So let's move to our panelists. We've got a group of 4 folks who have really graciously agreed to share their perspective as it relates to agriculture, food insecurity, and Indigenous food issues. Our panelists are providing some local context that will help us better to connect to the opportunities for representation and support at a federal level. So we'll connect to those federal issues through a question that we've prepared with our panelists. So to start us off is Rebecca Neen. And to begin, just make sure that you introduce yourself and your role, and share a little bit about the sector industry that you're representing. And then you can end with your question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. So I live and work on Left Fields Farm at Cranogue Ales. We are the oldest on-farm certified organic brewery in Canada. We're in Sorrento on Shuswap Lake. We care for the land and the water in the unceded territory of the Sequester people, and we are profoundly grateful to be allowed to stay here. Our intention in being on this land is to restore and support a sound ecosystem and to improve social justice. We're responsible to the original caretakers of this land and responsible for supporting them and the larger community of feather, fur, and fin. Organic farmers are, of course, affected by both climate change in our daily lives and significantly by federal policy. This year, we've been affected by wildfire threat, by smoke, heat, lack of water. Our hop harvest is about a quarter of what it normally is because of heat and drought. All our plants are sunburned. They're hungry because our soil life has been depleted by the lack of water, more than we can possibly irrigate to make up for. Our livestock stopped growing during the summer's heat dome, along with most of our garden and our field crops. We've been feeding hay since early July. That's 2 months earlier than normal. That hay is double normal pricing as well, and that forces us to raise prices on our lamb. In other words, by not addressing climate change at a critical and fundamental level, successive federal governments from various parties have put the cost of food out of reach of ordinary Canadians, ordinary people, and they're increasing the level of poverty in this country. Like all other farmers, we're adapting. We're increasing our water use efficiency. We're finding ways to improve our irrigation. We're replacing our most heat-sensitive plant varieties with more heat-tolerant ones. I think we'll be growing a lot more melons coming up. We're increasing our use of mulches for water retention and weed suppression. We're shifting the way we prune our apples so that we've got more leaf coverage to reduce the sunburn and loss of, again, a third of our crop this year. We're paying closer attention to intensive grazing techniques to try to keep our pastures green longer into the season. But all of this adaptation collectively needs research, it needs funding, it needs policy support at the federal level to keep farmers growing foods in ways that support a healthy environment. Because only with a healthy environment are we all going to be able to continue to grow the food that we need. So this is critical to food security. Federal policies around agriculture currently make a really big deal out of supporting regenerative agriculture as the way to address carbon sequestration in farming. This is great. And it is absolutely true that organic agriculture sequesters more carbon, increases soil health, improves animal welfare, and improves biodiversity. Organic systems are the leaders in regenerative agriculture. Conventional ag that continues to use agrotoxins to kill biological life cannot ever be considered regenerative, no matter how little they till the soil. So what we need is for the federal government to actually fund improvements and deepening of the organic standards and processes. We need to normalize organic agriculture and make agrotoxic farming like a way of the past. Right now, the federal government is actually slashing funding to organic programs. Standards review, revision, and maintenance is being defunded, which means that we can't keep up with the changes to materials and processes that are happening all over the world. And without that funding, we can't continue to keep our standards robust, detailed, and functional. We need more funding for organic research to improve our regenerative practices and equipment and to maintain a database of organic operators and materials, as well as for straight up technical assistance to organic farmers. Some organic products are actually now being rejected for equivalency with US products because of our lack of inspectors and the lack of government support for organic standards maintenance. We're out of step with the US and the EU, our major trading partners for organic food. We need the federal government to fund apprenticeship programs for organic inspectors, so we have plenty of well-trained, fully qualified inspectors all over the country. We need funding to support certification for organic farmers so that all of this innovation and climate regeneration is not happening at the expense of those who are also producing all our food and feeding the country. Farmers need to be supported to improve our practices, not punished with extra fees for taking on the responsibility of carbon sequestration and climate renewal. We're doing it every day. We're not seeing the result from the federal level. So we need all federal parties to commit to fully funding a Canadian organic program. I will ask the question. The organic community has been practicing regenerative agriculture for over 25 years. This addresses climate change through reducing greenhouse gas emissions, sequestering carbon in the soil, and increasing biodiversity. However, funding has been cut to organic agriculture. Will your government commit to shifting funding currently going to regenerative agriculture back into organics to ensure this industry can continue to help Canada meet climate action goals and commitments? For example, will your party commit to fund the Canadian Organic Program, including funding standards maintenance and revision, the training of verification officers to maintain our vital export industry, and direct funding for Canadian organic farmers to defray the cost of organic certification and to allow more farmers to become organic? Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. That I'll remind you again, that question is in the chat so that you can have a look at it because it is a big question. And I think we will start with Andrea for your 1 minute response, followed by Mel, and then Shelley, and then Ron's video. Thank you. I'll remind you as well.
Thank you,
Go
Rebecca,
ahead.
for a very concise and comprehensive layout of the situation. Yes, it is true that the Canadian government has decided that they will no longer fund the Canadian organic standards. And this puts Canadian farmers at a supreme disadvantage because both the European Commission, the Directorate General, and the US Department of Agriculture directly fund the organic industry, directly fund the organic standards. They also fund expert groups for technical assistance. Canada has long been the poor country cousin for that. Canadian organic farmers are the fastest growing sector of agriculture in Canada. And so we really need parity with those other countries for equality in both our domestic and our export markets. There is a national alliance of farmers across Canada focused on finding solutions for climate change, and I'm up.
You can finish the sentence.
I can finish my sentence. They have been funded by the Liberal government on a multi-year basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. That's great. I know it's tricky. Mel, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Liz. Conservatives, our party, value the contributions that organic producers make to Canada's ag sector. And that's why the previous Conservative government worked with the organic sector and invested over $20 million in research and innovation and market development and the business risk management supports. The previous Conservative government also elevated the voice of organic producers in 2015 when it appointed the Canada Organic Trade Association to the Plant Breeders' Rights Advisory Committee. Conservatives understand how essential standard certification and verification are to the organic producers and exporters, and will continue to work with the organic agriculture and agri-food sector to help ensure it is adaptable, competitive, and stable. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Shelley, we'll go to you.
All right, so I absolutely like organic farming. It is a way that we are going to be working on the agriculture and getting our land back to the way that it needs to be. The Liberal Party is a science and evidence-based party. We'll ensure that the work that we do in regards to food security, food production, food management is based under these principles. We have our national adaptation strategy for climate change, which provides us with that framework that we are going to then utilize to look at the land and then consult with farmers and in the agriculture sector. What I think is also important, which you did touch on, is that adaptation of our agriculture. So that is our cover cropping, our no-tills, and choosing crops that is best suited for our land. So I think we need to look at this as much more than just one or the other. It needs to incorporate all of it. Thank you.
The links between sustainable food production and fighting climate change have long been apparent. That's why for years the NDP has been committed to funding organic food production and certification. We want to see a thriving agricultural sector. Agriculture and food are major drivers of both the local and the national economy. nourishing our population and providing 1 out of 8 jobs. Food production is entirely reliant on the health of the natural environment, and the federal government has a key role to play in working with the provinces and the territories to promote the sustainable production of food.
Here we go. Thank you. Thank you all. I know I recognize that these are big questions that probably would benefit from a lot of back and forth conversation. Unfortunately, we're going to keep moving on. And so next we will hear from Henry, our second panelist. We have Henry, there we go. And yeah, just remind you, introduce yourself and your role, and then share a little bit more about your sector, followed by a question. Thanks so much, Henry.
Okay, hello all. So I was just asked to do this in the last couple days, and I was busy chopping corn till, well, last night. And so I'm not real prepared, so bear with me. Anyhow, so I farm 4 miles north of Enderby along the highway there opposite the junction. So if anybody drives by, you can kind of see a face that goes with the farm there. I'm second generation farmer. My dad started full-time dairy farming in 1972, and he bought the home farm here in 74. We've expanded the farm to include quite a bit more land there. So I now farm with my 2 sons and some employees. So I'm really pleased to work with family. It's great to work with family, and it's a pretty cool industry to be in that way. So yeah, we milk about 170 cows plus young stock. So probably, you know, another 170 to 200 there. We farm 350 acres, a mix of alfalfa and corn. We grow corn for silage, for forage for our cows, as well as we grow some corn as grain. So we feed some of our own grain as well. So I am president of CODA, which is the Kamloops Okanagan Dairy Association. So I represent, it's about 75 family dairy farms in the area, mostly Armstrong, Enderby, Salmon Arm, with some outliers. So altogether, we probably produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million liters of milk a year amongst all our members. So yeah, COVID has upset, you know, milk demand, but milk is an essential service, an essential food. So it was single digit changes, not, you know, massive changes like other sectors, but it's still challenging. And then of course this year we had drought, and then we had heat and more drought, and we had fire and more drought, and spent a lot of time changing irrigation this summer. So it's been a challenge. I've got irrigation, so I've got pretty good crops, and a lot of dairy farmers do, but some don't, and are really challenged with forage supply. We're very fortunate none of our dairy farmers here actually burnt. A number of them were on evacuation alert. We had one farm that evacuated, and we actually hosted some of those cows. But fortunately, the farm didn't burn at all, so they went back. So that's been our summer. I think the summer, you know, you can all relate to. It's just more intense when you're a dairy farmer. So I just want to make a few comments about sustainability in general in the Canadian dairy industry. So over the years, dairy farming has made great strides in cutting carbon emissions, reducing land use, and conserving water, thanks to advances in agriculture technology and the sector's ongoing commitment to continuous improvement. So we're proud to say the Canadian dairy sector already has one of the lowest carbon footprints in the world. So it's about half of the global average. From 1990 to 2016, the carbon footprint of Canadian milk on a per liter basis is decreased by 23%. So that's something that we're proud of and we continue to work at. Farms continue to seek ways to be sustainable. One way is biodigesters. We don't have any of them here. We do have one of the farms here put solar panels on the roof. Last time I talked to them, he said that was working really good. And so we just always look for technology that helps us to become more sustainable. So, so I work in, I'm part of a supply managed system. So as you may know, we operate under supply management. A key principle is the dairy sector strives to produce milk as needed to meet domestic demand. So this means avoiding overproduction, reducing waste, and a lower transportation footprint as food is produced closer to home. And that stability enables us to reinvest in our farms, new technology, driving innovation and economic activity here in Canada. So we kind of have three stools, we like to say, that support supply management. One is obviously controlling, the internal Canadian supply of milk. The second one would be having a sustainable economic return. And the third one would be controlling imports in the country. So one of the challenges has been is the number of trade deals have been signed. They came to fruition and are continuing to come to fruition. But in the last little bit, they've had quite a flood of milk, which has really been a challenge to balance our production with the need. Usually the fall is a high demand and it's not this fall. So it's a challenge there. We look for continued support nationally for border control, CFIA, being able to measure what comes in the country. So I think I've probably talked long enough to talk about my question. There we go. I got the finger thumbs up. All right. So according to the National Farmers Union, the supply management system of dairy farmers has worked well for over 50 years, and it protects the interests of dairy farmers, processors, and consumers without drawing on the public purse. Farmers receive a fair return for their labor, management, and investment in return for controlling their volume of production. Dairy processors receive a reliable supply of milk at predictable prices. Consumers receive high-quality, wholesome dairy products at reasonable prices and are never faced with shortages. The recent shortage in BC had to do with the new plant coming online and the challenges they had there. So it wasn't a problem from the farmer end. So the whole system runs without a penny of government subsidy payments. And so we're asking if you will continue to support the current supply managed system for Canada's dairy farmers.
Thank you so much, Henry. Good
Thank you.
question. And yeah, I appreciate you fitting us in this very busy time after this very taxing summer. Yeah, thanks so much. Shelley, why don't we start with you this time, and then followed by Andrea and then Mel.
Sure. Yes, I do support supply management. It's a way to stabilize prices. If there are set quotas in various industries, there's no risk to that overproduction and product flooding the market, which leads to this big ups and downs cycles. And so by managing the supply, we're able to both have stabilized prices in our grocery stores, as well as farmers have predictable income. And we don't have this, like you said, this sudden overproduction, and we can't do anything with it. So yes, I do support supply management.
Thank you. Andrea, go for it.
I absolutely support supply management. It is, as Henry knows, it's the envy of dairy and poultry producers in other countries, including the US. And yet we are always under pressure from WTO. Just for those who don't know, the farm gate receipts of the dairy industry in the Thompson Okanagan are 10 times that of our tree fruit industry. They're 4 times that of our grape industry. And without supply management, this area would not sustain the small business infrastructure of feed mills, dealers, suppliers, machine shops, etc. Farmers and ranchers travel from all over the BC interior on a regular basis to buy supplies here, which supports all of our local businesses. Without supply management, we would not have the robust strength of our local economy. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Mel, go ahead.
Well, thank you, and good to see you again, Henry. having grown up on a dairy farm in the Shuswap, I know firsthand the value of supply management and the stability that it brings. The system stabilizes the input so that producers are able to rely on a stable flow of milk products into the processing plants, and it stabilizes prices for the consumers so that Canadians have a certainty of what their prices are going to be. But what we've seen happening to the supply managed sector over the last 6 years, and I know this from consistently talking with the producers, is that their concerns are how the current Liberal government has not stood up for the supply managed sector in the trade agreements. They've been slow to provide any compensation as a result to those trade agreements as well. So I do support the supply managed sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. That's great. I wonder if there's, oh, yeah, go ahead.
I fully agree with the National Farmers Union. Supply management protects our family farms, rural communities, and hundreds of thousands of jobs. New Democrats are committed to fully protecting supply management and ensuring reciprocity in all trade negotiations and supporting our supply managed sectors as they innovate and grow. An NDP government will work on side with our local farmers, producers, and our farm families.
That's great. Well, what I was going to say is I can see that everyone's in agreement here. I wonder if there's a follow-up question from our audience about, I don't know, the opportunity for local processing infrastructure. Henry, feel free to chuck a follow-up question in the Q&A or in the chat, and we can come back to this in the Q&A period. Just throwing that out there. Our next panelist is Serena Kaner. She's going to change the subject a little bit for us from agriculture towards food security, food insecurity. So thank you, Serena.
And are they gonna, oh, here we go. Sorry, I made slides because that's just how I roll. So my name is Serena Kaner, and I am head of the Shuswap Food Action Society, and we are kind of like the counterpart of Liz in Salmon Arm. But today I'm also speaking to you as a registered dietitian. I worked for Interior Health for 12 years in chronic disease management. And a lot of the concerns that I'm bringing up today are as a parent and as a dietitian. So yeah, you can switch the slide. Or can I? So in 2019, I got a grant from Interior Health, and I was hired by the school district to evaluate food in schools. And it was looking at food security. So do kids have access to food at school? Are they learning the skills they need to prepare food for themselves and support health in adulthood? And are the foods being sold in our schools meeting ministry mandated guidelines? And the answer to all these questions at most schools was no. So this sort of took me on a different journey. You can switch the slide. Just to give the MPs or the people, everyone here, some background. This is a municipal data, and it looks at how many servings of fruits and vegetables kids have a day. And as you can see, most kids are not even meeting half of that, or less than 50% in most age groups are getting that much fruit a day. And that is an indicator of, health and reducing your risk of chronic disease later in life. Can you switch the slide again? So this is a recent statistics infographic put out by the government. And as you can see, that 44% of adults over 20 have chronic disease. And so this is today. And we know that all of these numbers are rising quickly. Can you switch the slide? And then looking at poverty, and again, this is pre-COVID data. This is the 2019 poverty report. You can see that, about 20% of residents are in poverty. for children. So that's 1 in 5 children in our region are living in poverty. And if you look at single parent households, 50%, which means that every school in our district has food insecure children. That's what it means. So I just want to tell a story. One of the things is I really believe, and many people across this country, is the need for universal school meal programs. So this was a kitchen in one of our local high schools that had no school meal program. So it was a school of 600 kids that really didn't have a meal program and was selling Mr. Noodles, chips, and pop for lunch options, which do not meet guidelines. You can switch the slide. So Shuswap Food Action decided to do something about this, and we had some volunteers, and we decided, and we got a grant to make lunch for these kids 1 day a week. And this was during COVID. And during COVID, the students were not allowed to leave their school. So it's not like they could walk to Tim Hortons and get lunch. It's like if they hadn't bring a lunch to school, well, there was nothing else that they could do. So we started making, and we called it Foodie Fridays. And if you switch it again, and what we found is that, by the end, we had about 200 kids coming every day, and we were just making soup, and we had buns and we had fruit. And the reason that we need federal support for these programs is that, we did these as volunteers, and it was great until the pandemic numbers started peaking, and we lost all of our volunteers. And I think, the nonprofit sector, that is a real problem post COVID. Foods that are nutritional cost more money. They're more expensive to buy. We're trying to support our local farmers. And that is also more expensive, unfortunately. And it's logistically more challenging, right? Is you have to have those relationships in place. And the other problem is with schools is that, within walking distance of every school is a convenience store that are happy to sell, chips and pop for a really cheap price. And so at the same time, our, food costs are rising, and there's more children who need food. So I think the problem is that school food is not economically, it doesn't really fit into the traditional capitalist model of efficiency and cost, because the cheapest and easiest thing to feed kids is junk food, and they like it and they're happy. And that's not what is in their best interest for learning, for their nutritional health, and for preventing chronic disease, as well as for the environment. So these programs need federal support because we're kind of fighting an uphill battle. And at the end of the day, kids have the right to have healthy food. Everyone has the right to have healthy food. And so our question for you today is, can you go ahead? As Canada plans for recovery from COVID-19, school food programs will be essential for the health and well-being of children, youth, and their families and communities. If you're elected, can we count on you and your party to advance a universal, cost-shared, healthy school food program for Canada that has federal investment and standards?
Well said, Serena. Thank you. We'll start with Mel this time. 1 minute. Thanks, Mel.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, for Serena, for everything you are doing along with your friends to provide the nutritious meals where they're so badly needed. I want to recognize so many organizations throughout the riding that are assisting with food at schools. Although the health program delivery and education are the jurisdiction of the province of BC, I do see an opportunity for the federal government to provide some leadership and cooperation with the government of BC to assess a program that would benefit all students and producers from across Canada. It's the education system and health system are provincial jurisdictions, so it's difficult for the federal government to come in and oversee all of this, but I certainly see where we can work together to assess what kind of a program can be put together. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Shelley, why don't you go ahead?
So absolutely, we support it. Again, like we talked before in the beginning, my kids are using that program at the school right now, and it's absolutely fantastic. We know that nutrition is so extremely critical for kids in the school. Nutritious food helps growth and the ability to learn, and therefore we need to protect those school kids who may not have that proper access to nutritious food at home. And I know there are kids there that are in that position. So we have a plan to work with provinces, municipalities, and Indigenous partners to work towards a national school nutritious meal program with $1 billion investments over 5 years. And we're going to introduce restrictions on marketing of food and beverages to children to establish that front of package labeling, which is going to promote those healthy food choices, which we really just need children to see and to know exactly what it is that they are consuming. Thank you.
It's great. Thanks, Shelley. Andrea, go ahead.
Canada is the only G7 country without either a national school food program or national standards. And Serena and her partners across the other people that are involved in this across the province have been involved for some time. And for that, I thank you. We know that health, attendance, and learning outcomes are significantly improved by providing in-school meals. I was lucky enough for a number of years to run a program called Cook It, Try It, Like It. And what I found was the level of food insecurity was quite dramatic, actually, in most of the schools that I worked in both Vernon and Armstrong and Enderby. And the children had such an appreciation when those programs that involve them in food skills. So like Shelley and Mel have said, we need collaboration across every level of government, from community right up to the federal government. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And we'll play Ron's video.
A recent UNICEF report ranked Canada 37 out of 41 countries in terms of access to nutritious food for children. And despite the urgency, the Liberal government has failed to improve access to healthy food for kids. Along with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, I am committed to making sure no child goes to school hungry. That's why we will partner with the provinces, municipalities, and Indigenous communities on a national school nutrition program so that our kids can always count on daily nutritious meals that follow the Canada Food Guidelines.
That's great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I know, again, that one is one we could probably talk about back and forth for quite some time. We're going to play now a video that we recorded today with Nikki Lawrence from who's the food security coordinator for the Okanagan Indian Band. A number of invitations went out to the Okanagan Indian Band Band Council and other members, and they're just slammed with what they've experienced this summer with being with wildfires. So we were very grateful to have Nikki join us this morning to record a video. You can go ahead and play that. Thank you.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. I'm Nikki Lawrence. I'm a Wet'suwet'en person, been born and raised on Stilts territory, and I'm currently working for Okanagan Indian Band as the food security coordinator. This year, our biggest project has been our community garden with 73 beds growing organic vegetables for the community and with the community. In high school and beyond, I've been working on all sorts of different farms, usually organic farms. So I've had my hands in the dirt for 8+ years now, doing my best to grow responsibly. I really wanted to get a career with the Indigenous and start working with that. So that's why I hopped on the team at OKIB, and I've been pretty happy there, trying to implement new practices and learning what food security and insecurity looks like in Indigenous communities.
And maybe you can just share a little bit about what the community garden is offering, what it has offered this summer for the folks who live there.
So the community garden started at the end of last year with COVID kind of coming up and having food on shelves being questioned and the prices of local produce kind of skyrocketing, OKIB decided that food security something needs to be implemented, and we decided a community garden is the best way to start solving our problem of food insecurity. So we built the garden, 73 beds, all organic, and we went into this summer a little bit ready to go, a little bit more planned. So we started the garden with a community planting day. The daycare came down and they all planted a few beds and started watching it grow every day. So the garden was hustling and bustling for a while there in the community, and we were right at the point where we were getting into the harvesting season, and people started showing up more and more, collecting their veggies. It was an open gate format where people can just come on down and get whatever they need. And then, right as the dramaticity of it goes, we had our first tomato go red, and then we kind of ran into a water issue. We tested positive for some bacteria, and we were quite worried that our vegetables were going to be deemed inedible. So we got a second water testing and some soil samples taken in. As we're waiting for the results for that, the White Rock Lake fire forced us to move out, as it's kind of getting closer to our reserve land. So we were kind of kicked off of our land for a while during the fire. It was 6 weeks that we were going from alert to kind of allowed back in.
And then maybe you can just share a little bit about like the impact to the community from the fire, because it was pretty intense.
Especially on food security.
Yeah, so a lot of people, there were 9 homes and 1 business lost. The business being, as many know, Little Kingdom, which is one of the only food sources for the milk and bread type grocery shopping out on West Side. And for many, it's at least a half an hour drive into Vernon. So that's been very impactful, having that loss, along with many homes losing power for a long time, turning off their fridges. They had to empty and often throw away their fridges, which is, for Indigenous, they lost their hunts for the year, which is their meat for the winter. And it really impacted a lot of people and has a lot of people questioning like what they're going to eat over this winter period and how they're going to replace the hunts that they've had. And now with our hunting grounds, a lot of it burnt up and a lot of loss of life in the forest, worried about if we'll even be able to fill the freezers again. Same for salmon, has been really disrupted this year and very, very minimal. So it's a big question of, we had this great fire that created a lot of food loss, and now how do we get that food back? It's a big question we're having.
Do you have any thoughts on how to bring back or renew the food on the land and in the waters, and what you feel the future should hold?
Well, to me, I had a whole idea of what food security is and what it means when I came into this position, but I'm learning quickly it's not what I had greatly imagined of living off the land and preserving in our cultural ways. But I think we're getting forced into a time where we're going to have to use adaptive farming, whatever that means, whether it be indoor growing or hydroponics or greenhouses, whatever the new way of growing is, we're going to have to be forced into that. But I think part of food security will be that, and on the side, fighting for returning our land to being salvageable and living off of it. But I think that's going to take a long time. So food security is going to be bending and finding new ways until we can work together and do this again.
And I think that leads to your question that you have for our candidates and our federal MP and our national government. So would you like to ask them about how they might support your food sovereignty and food security at the OKIP?
Yeah, so with Indigenous people having 2.5 times the rate of food insecurity, as a federal MP, how do you plan on supporting and working with the Indigenous communities in addressing food insecurity and water health issues? Are you willing to fully accept and to implement traditional teachings and practices into industrial and governmental practices on all lands and water, including things like cultural burning, a practice that has proven sustainable throughout our history?
I love that video. Shelley, I know you have to jump off in a minute here. I'm going to let you respond to that question, and it's in the chat as well.
Sure, thank you. So every time there is a fire, we absolutely need to recognize that the land that is impacted is usually the traditional hunting and gathering grounds for Indigenous, and will exacerbate some of these food security issues. We have a lot more investing that needs to be done for First Nations communities, especially rural nations, especially rural ones. School Lake is an example of how developing Freedom Road made a huge difference to food access and food insecurities. And we have funding available for Indigenous communities. And I would strongly advocate for ensuring that OKIB, which lost most of their local access to groceries, and that this infrastructure is invested so the community itself does not become a food desert, as well as work on implementing land management practices to protect those hunting and gathering spaces. And I would personally dedicate a significant portion of my energy to ensure that resources were brought to improve this situation.
Yeah, thank you. And we realize that you have to jump off now. Please feel free to come back if you can.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Andrea. To you.
Thank you. It's not that the funding isn't available. The funding is available. What is missing is the capacity of small bands to actually access that funding. We need to support them to build the capacity. So our Indigenous communities need more control over their land use decisions. They need more control over the water stewardship issues in their territory. We really need to implement co-management agreements between Indigenous communities and the various levels of government and various stakeholders, because this is not good enough. So the point about building capacity is in other places, they actually help the smallest, the most fragile get their feet on the economic ladder. And we don't do it that way in Canada. And we really need to change how we do it in order to help those most fragile communities move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Mel, go ahead.
Thank you, Liz. And in talking to the leadership of OKIB, I fully understand how busy they have been and how stressed they've been through the wildfire season that we've had. The expansion of agriculture activities in Indigenous communities can certainly support food security, economic development, and employment in those Indigenous communities. Since being elected, I've presented the federal government information to support the promotion of agricultural production, international trade opportunities, and economic development for Indigenous communities in the North Okanagan-Shuswap. Thus far, I'm unsatisfied with the government response or their lack of response.
15 seconds.
I'll continue to press the federal government to work with the Indigenous communities in this riding and help them increase their agriculture production, increase their food security, and everything else tied in with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mel.
My party will work with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders on Indigenous food sovereignty, which includes expanded access to healthy food, including traditional foods, and a particular focus on rural and northern communities. I'm committed to improving food security for our local Indigenous communities.
Okay. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I know there was a comment in the chat there that you are absolutely a wealth of information and a real asset to this riding and these communities. One of the things that I've come to understand, and probably this is the same for folks here in our work with Land to Table, is that food systems are complex. This work is complex work. And I think that everyone today, through what you've shared, has really highlighted that complexity and the need for many perspectives and the need for that collective wisdom and partnerships to create meaningful and long-term solutions that include Indigenous ways of being and knowing. So thank you to our panelists for helping us see that, and to our candidates for your responses. We're going to shift now into our, as if that wasn't a question and answer period, we're going to shift now into a question and answer period. You only have a half an hour left and then you can relax. So this is where the candidates have a chance to respond to questions that we've shared with them prior to this afternoon. And then the second half will include questions from our audience. So audience, please make sure that you continue to put those questions in the Q&A function. I think I saw a question from Henry that's in the chat that might be better placed in the Q&A. If Mary, if you want to catch that. So the first question that I have for you, and again, there's some preamble to these questions to help create that context, but we'll paste it all into that chat function so you can follow along. So this question is a little bit of a follow-up from something that Nikki touched on. So we know that Fisheries and Oceans Canada is responsible for ensuring healthy and sustainable aquatic ecosystems through habitat protection and sound science. This year, communities across the province have experienced severe heat and drought conditions that have left fish, including wild Pacific salmon, cooking in streams or stranded due to low water flow. And so this is a bit of a two-part question. How will your party support the province in securing and restoring freshwater streams and rivers for salmon and other species? Will your party also commit to ongoing funding to support wild salmon through the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund? And then also, because our salmon from ocean to stream are all connected, will you commit to removing all salmon farms from BC's coastal waters by 2025? So there's technically 3 questions there. And Andrea and Mel, it's like, now it's you two left. So Andrea, why don't I let you start with that one?
Sure, Mel is going to have much deeper information than I do, but I would like to say that we've been supporters and followers of the fisheries biologist, RP Bio, Alexandra Morton, for over 20 years. And so first of all, yes, I know that it's a complicated system with the salmon farms, but there's loads of evidence that we need to remove the penned salmon from our coastlines. And then the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund is an ongoing funding for a number of different community initiatives. And so that really needs, I mean, salmon is the lifeblood of our whole ecosystem here on the West Coast. We need to continue to support the work that a variety of communities are doing across the coast and inland waters, because without it, everything else starts falling apart really fast. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Now go ahead.
Thank you, Liz. Having spent almost 6 years now on the Standing Committee for Fisheries, we've seen how even with the billions of dollars that the current Liberal government has put into the DFO and wild salmon, the stocks still continue to decline. In fact, the latest 647 million, I think it is, that they've promised, has been promised without a plan on how to deliver it. What we've seen right here in the Okanagan, I've toured with Chief Louis down to the hatchery in Penticton to see how they have been able to bring salmon back to the Okanagan system by working with the Okanagan Nation Alliance. I believe that's the best way to move forward in partnership with the province and the Indigenous communities so that we can all work together to restore those salmon stocks. The net pen issue on the coast is something we will transition from in a scientifically based way. Thank you.
Like most, if not all, NDP candidates this election, I have signed the Wild First Pledge, and an NDP government will support Indigenous-led nature conservation and land use and climate planning, including growing the Indigenous Guardians program and working hand in hand to advance the protection and restoration of the wild Pacific salmon populations on the West Coast. In order to do this, our approach will be focused on conserving, protecting, and restoring critical habitats. We will fully implement the recommendations of the Cohen Commission and work with the province of BC and First Nations to support the transition to land-based closed containment farming systems.
Great, thanks. It's good to hear those sentiments that we will be moving away from open net pen fish farms. I just want to point out in the chat that Mary has posted a link to the pledge that's going around for candidates to sign. Okay, our next question relates to agriculture and the safety and regulation of our food and seeds. And this is a two-part question. So let's see. Do you support mandatory government safety assessments for all genetically engineered foods and seeds? For example, if elected, would you ensure that all genetically engineered foods and seeds are regulated? And then again, related to this question, this summer, after proposing to weaken the regulation of the herbicide glyphosate or Roundup, public opposition led the health, agricultural, and environment ministers to announce a pause until 2022. What is your position on the use of glyphosate in Canada? Sorry, Mel, why don't you start us off with that one?
Okay, thank you, Liz. Currently, Health Canada performs a thorough safety assessment of all new GM genetically modified foods to make sure that they're safe and nutritious as foods already sold in Canada. The Canada Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, is responsible for environmental risk assessments of genetically modified plants for growing, safety assessment of GM foods for animal feed, and safety of GM foods on field trials. Yes, I support the assessment systems and continued regulation of genetically modified foods and seeds. As for the glyphosate, I believe our regulatory system entrusted with determining the safety should be open to reassessment and applied through any new information that's found. Thank you.
I support, but do not entirely trust our federal processes. And so I actually support the mandatory labeling for transgenic ingredients and seeds. With regard to glyphosate, it's been designated as a probable human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And last year, Monsanto settled 100,000 lawsuits in 2020 for roughly $11 billion. Those who use Roundup weed killer or other glyphosate herbicides are at risk for non-Hodgkin lymphoma and other forms of cancer, and that has been well documented. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea.
Yes, there needs to be a full and transparent safety assessment for all GMO foods and seeds. And the federal government has a direct role in ensuring that all food labeling is accurate and trustworthy, and that the public understands the information provided. New Democrats will ensure that food descriptions and claims are clear, factual, informative, and not misleading to the public. Glyphosate has toxic impacts, not just on humans, but on wildlife and especially our pollinators as well. We will work to strengthen regulations around its use or eliminate it altogether. Quebec does not allow it and has forestry and agriculture industries that manage to thrive without dumping glyphosate onto the ecosystem.
Okay, so that we've got about 15 minutes left, and we do want to make sure we get to audience questions. So that kind of completes the pre-prepared questions that we had sent to candidates. So we'll jump into some audience questions, and Mary's going to paste those into the chat for us. So I'll start with this one from Mitch Ward, and these are really thoughtful questions. So thank you for adding those. So each year, thousands of temporary foreign workers come to the North Okanagan-Shuswap and have played a significant role in keeping our local food systems alive during the pandemic. Currently, these workers' permits are tied to a single employer and leave them without legal status if they choose to flee an abusive employer while they are employed in this region. As elected representatives, what would you do to improve labor protections for workers? And would you honor their calls for reforms that help level the significant employer-employee power imbalance that currently exists in the federal temporary foreign worker program? So yeah, you may just want to take a second to look at that. And this is just between Andrea and Mel now. So Andrea, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. My friend Amy Cohen runs the Regional Action Network for Temporary Foreign Workers. And so I have heard firsthand a lot of horror stories of temporary foreign workers who have not been treated with basic human decency by not usually the owners of the farms, but the people that they hire as superintendents. And this is something that really, it puts the workers in between a rock and a hard place. And we need to work to support those farms to treat them better and to also have the dialogue open between their advocacy groups and various levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Mel, go ahead.
Thank you, and great question. Certainly I've had concerns brought to my attention around this. Just as COVID started and got rolling last summer, I actually hosted a roundtable with a colleague from Ontario where they have a much different system than here in BC, where the temporary farm workers can come in and they all go into a worker pool basically, and a farm will call up and say, I need 15 workers today. And someone would pick up those 15 workers and take them to the farm. That program ended up causing a lot of problems with transfer and communication of COVID between different groups, and caused them a lot of problems there. The system that we had here in BC seemed to protect the workers in that way, but not from the abuse that's taking place. And I believe every worker should have a safe and respectful workplace. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a deep issue. Could use a lot more conversation as well, but we will go on to the next question. So Henry asks, grocery retailing is highly concentrated in Canada, unilaterally imposing high listing fees to all their suppliers. Would you support a grocery code of conduct to strengthen the country's food supply chain? Mel, sorry, we'll just bounce between one and the other, starting first. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly a great question, Henry. And we've seen the globalization, if you want to call it that, of the food sector and reduction of competition. That is one thing that's in our plan, in our platform moving forward. I hope everybody has a chance to take a look at it. It's available at conservative.ca/plan. And we have recognized that global or grocery competition needs a code of conduct so that we can address the price fixing. We'll introduce stiffer penalties for price fixing. And certainly everyone needs to be protected from this. The producers that are being squeezed on the prices that the processors or the grocery stores will pay, and the consumers are being squeezed by those same grocers. So certainly a grocer's code of conduct is in our platform. Thank you.
Canada changed the policy on grocery regulation back in the 60s. It might have been the early 70s, but it was a long time ago. And what has happened is we've got increasing consolidation of the retail grocery, in that at present, the 5 of the richest men in Canada own our grocery food delivery system in terms of retail grocery. This is not the case in other countries. The US, which is closest to us in that, has opened up, changed their regulations so that there has been quite a growth in small grocery and community-owned grocery. We need to support other models and change the policy and the regulations under which our retail grocery operates, because it's not serving the population well. It's serving to make the richest people richer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I have a, just as like a pretty straightforward question here. Should farmers who build soil be compensated for the carbon they sequester?
Can I go ahead?
I'm sorry. Yes.
There are already programs in Canada that are that have been started by soil biologists that are paying farmers for carbon capture and sequestration. So there is already that ability. There are a number of programs in Western Canada. There are more in Eastern Canada. The challenge, of course, in BC is that much of our land holdings are quite small as compared to the farmers in the prairies and even in Ontario and Quebec who are farming on sections of land. But those programs do exist. And yes, I think farmers should be compensated for it, for sure, because I know as one of them, it's not easy to do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead now.
Thank you. Absolutely, carbon sequestration needs to be part of our future, and we've recognized that in our plan to secure the environment. By working with the agriculture sector and the forestry sector, we believe we can capture and contain a lot of the carbon that's out there as part of our plan to meet the targets that have been set. Instead of just promising ever increasing targets and never reaching them, our plan has been analyzed and stated that it will meet the targets without doing it on the backs of hardworking Canadians. So that carbon sequestration through the agriculture sector and our forestry sector is part of our plan. I hope you can take a look at it.
Thank you. Okay, I think we probably have time to fit 2 more questions in. The next one is, many suggest that a return of land taken during settler colonialism to Indigenous communities is essential in efforts to restore traditional food systems, as well as within any movement towards reconciliation. What is your commitment to pushing for this land back at a federal level? And what is your perspective on the issue as an individual? So Mel, I think Andrew.
Thank you. So much has changed in Canada in the last 150 years. We've seen the harms that have been done by colonialization and the Indigenous or the residential schools. True reconciliation is going to take all of us working together so that no one is at loss for the gain of someone else. I don't think we need to work better as communities with Indigenous communities, with local communities, with private landowners to make sure we bring back the traditional land values and cultures, but so in a way that we're able to continue our strong economy and have a bright future for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. And yeah, so the question is about land back.
This harkens back to the commodification of a common good like air and water. And it is deeply troubling to me. I've been lucky enough to work on behalf of a number of Indigenous communities as they are in negotiations with the provincial government for buying land that is part of their traditional territory to add to their holdings. And on a personal level, as a landowner, as a farmer in the North Okanagan, it's something that we are, as we approach retirement, struggling with the fact that we live and farm on stolen land, and that the value of that land, the value that we bought, we didn't buy it from our Indigenous community. We're on Sequester and Silks territory. And so this is a complicated thing, and we can't do it if we do it without consultation, really meaningful consultation and honest communication with our Indigenous neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that that's a great question to end on. It's a really thoughtful question that came in from Mitch Ward, and again demonstrates the complexity in the topics that we're discussing this afternoon. This has been really fantastic and really fun. Thank you all for actively engaging in an Eat, Think, Vote event. I feel really proud that we were able to do this such last minute and that you were able to show up. I'd really like to thank the Food Secure Canada folks again, Gustav and Juliette, for their tools that they provided to support this and their effort to provide that technical support. And then lots of gratitude again to our panelists and our candidates for showing your commitment to the democratic process, and that you care about the importance of food systems. It means a lot for sure. Before we go, we've got about 3 minutes. I'm going to keep you for the full 90. Just add in the chat as we say goodbye, and as I say a couple more thank yous, add in the chat just something that you're taking away from this conversation. Because I think that'll be great for people to see, including our candidates. Andrea, yeah.
Do we get a chance to have a final comment, as I'd like to hear from the panelists as well as the candidates, if possible?
Yeah, well, if you're willing to, if everyone can do it in 20 seconds, I just want to point out, we're going to add a couple of links in the chat pointing to Food Secure Canada, the Eat, Think, Vote campaign, and then also to our Land to Table newsletter subscription and the Shuswap Food Action if you want to stay up to date in some of these local events and issues and projects that are ongoing. Sure, let's do that. Andrea, you start us off, maybe just really quickly, some final remarks.
Yeah, I just want to quote from one of my favorite Cree elders, Howard Johnson, who said, "What we do to the air, what we do to the water, what we do to the land, we do to ourselves." And this is the law. This has always been the law. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Mel, do you want to say a few closing words?
Now, is this our 1 minute closing that you was in there? Okay.
Yeah, technically it's a little shorter now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I'll keep it to 1 minute.
Yeah.
Thanks again for the organizers of Land to Table Forum, the panelists, and everyone who submitted questions. Much of the role of a member of parliament is building relationships that are so important to bring the issues, the challenges, and the ideas of our local ridings to Ottawa to discuss where we can implement change or improvement. That holds true for all producers who I've consistently visited and heard from to know the latest issues. It's also true of my relationships with the 5 bands in the riding, who I've met with again just this past week to ensure my understanding of their needs is current. Earlier, I spoke of adaptation, a key piece in terms of addressing climate change. It will take all levels of government to cooperatively address the security of our food supply and those who produce and consume it. I ask you to vote Mel Arnold on September 20th so that I can continue building those relationships and secure our future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. we've got about a minute left, but why don't I just give some time to Serena, Rebecca, Henry, if you want to say a few words, closing words, please feel free. You can also pass, up to you. Serena, if you want to, you can go ahead.
I just want to thank you for approaching me on this, and I feel warm and fuzzy right now because I just I think there's a lot of people on this call who really care about these issues, and I've heard concerns coming from really authentic places, and it really came across that these issues are meaningful to all the candidates, but especially with Mel and Andrea, who stayed till the end. I feel like some of these concerns have been heard, which makes me feel good.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Serena, for jumping in last minute. Rebecca, I can't see you right now, but if you want to say a couple words, please do.
Just that I appreciate the answers that were given, and I hope that there will be some actual serious levels of funding coming from the federal government to support these. And I trust that whoever is elected as MP will actually push putting funding to address the issues that were brought forward today.
Yeah, thank you. Henry, are you still with us?
I am still here.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, so thanks to everybody who participated. Thanks to our nominees who are running, and thanks for the time they put in there. Thanks to everybody for listening in. Food is who we are. So it's very important, and it's dear to our hearts. And so it's great to see people who are concerned and thoughtful about it. So thank you all.
Well said. Thanks. Mary, how about you? Do you want to say a couple words? No. Yes, maybe.
Just thanks everybody. It's really, really wonderful to have a forum just on this important topic of food.
Yeah, I feel warm and fuzzy as well, Serena. So, thank you. I hope you all have a really wonderful weekend, a restful weekend, especially for our candidates. And if you haven't voted already, get out on Monday and vote. So yeah, thanks again. Be well, everyone. We'll stand and wave.